Stop, listen, pay attention. Chosen one. This moment is not noise and it is not coincidence. Something has been pressing on your awareness and you felt it before you could name it. You did not imagine the weight. You noticed it because you are present enough to feel when something shifts. You may be tired in a way that sleep does not fully resolve. Not exhausted, but dulled. As if your energy has been filtered through too many demands at once. You may feel pressure without a clear source, a quiet insistence that something is asking for your attention while refusing to explain itself. At times, isolation has crept in, not because you withdrew, but because the space between you and others widened without warning. Even simple interactions may have felt slightly off. Not broken, just misaligned. This message meets you exactly there. You have been functioning, you have shown up. You have handled responsibilities, conversations, and expectations without falling apart. That matters. The tension was real, but it did not derail you. It lingered in the background, testing your balance rather than knocking you down. That is the detail most people miss, including you. What you experienced was not a crisis. It was a moment of exposure. You carried something into a space where it was not expected, and the response was immediate. Not loud, not dramatic, subtle. You felt it as resistance, hesitation, or a sense that the air shifted when you entered certain situations. You did not announce yourself. You did not try to change anything. And yet things reacted. This is not about fear, and it is not a warning. It is an explanation that arrives after the fact. Clarity comes now because you are steady enough to receive it. You do not need to replay every moment or analyze every interaction. The point is not what others did or did not do. The point is that you remained intact while something around you adjusted. This message is intentional. It is not for an audience. It is for you. You are being addressed because you already noticed the pressure and kept moving anyway. You trusted your internal pacing when external signals were unclear. That choice matters more than you realize. Stay with this. You do not need to rush ahead. The clarity you asked for is unfolding in sequence, and it begins by acknowledging what you already carried without needing permission. There is no ambiguity about who this is for. This message is not reaching for you. It is recognizing you. You did not stumble into this moment, and you are not listening by chance. What happened involved you directly, not as a bystander, not as someone observing from the edges, but as the central variable in the situation you moved through. You are addressed as chosen one, not as a title to admire, but as a designation that explains function. You were present in conditions that normally disrupt people, and yet you remained internally consistent. You did not need to prepare yourself consciously. You did not need to harden or perform strength. Your stability was already there, operating before you had time to think about it. That is the difference. Many people experience struggle only when they are aware of it. They brace themselves, they react, they push. You did something else entirely. You stayed regulated while pressure existed. You continued to make decisions, maintain awareness, and hold your ground without dramatizing the moment. That is not accidental, and it is not common. This message is for you because the event did not overwhelm you, even though it should have unsettled someone else. The pressure did not escalate because it met resistance that was quiet and unannounced. You did not consciously resist. You simply did not destabilize. That is an important distinction. You may not have labeled yourself as strong during that time. In fact, you may have questioned your clarity or wondered why things felt heavier than usual. That questioning did not weaken you. It showed that your awareness stayed online, even as conditions shifted. You remained present instead of dissociating or collapsing inward. This is what sets you apart without elevating you above others. You are not immune to strain. You feel it, you register it, but your internal structure absorbs it automatically. You do not need permission to hold yourself together. You do not need validation to stay coherent. That coherence is baseline for you. The message is not assigning you an identity you did not earn. It is naming a pattern you have already lived out repeatedly. When uncertainty enters the environment, you do not fragment. You adjust quietly. When resistance appears, you do not escalate. You remain steady. That steadiness is why this explanation is arriving now. You are capable of understanding what occurred without turning it into a story about fear, blame, or superiority. This message is for you because you stayed functional when the conditions tested your alignment, and you did not need to be told to do so. That is the lock. One sensation stood out more than the rest, and you noticed it without fully understanding it at the time. A kind of heaviness that did not come from sadness or exhaustion alone. Not pain, not panic. A pressure that sat quietly in your body and mind, as if something was asking you to carry more awareness than usual. You may have felt it in your chest, your shoulders, your breathing, or behind your eyes. It did not shout. It persisted. At first, it was easy to misinterpret. You may have wondered if you were losing focus, if you were becoming less motivated, or if something was wrong with your discipline. You might have questioned your own clarity, thinking you should feel more decisive, more energized, more certain. That self-questioning was understandable, but it was misplaced. That sensation was not a flaw. It was a signal. Your system was registering a shift before your conscious mind could label it. The pressure was not telling you that you were failing. It was indicating that you were moving through a transition point that required greater internal regulation. The feeling existed because your awareness stayed open rather than shutting down. Many people respond to subtle pressure by numbing it out. They distract themselves. They dull their sensitivity. You did the opposite without trying. You stayed present. That presence made the sensation more noticeable, not more dangerous. This is where confusion often arises. When you feel pressure and remain functional, the mind looks for something to blame. It searches for a personal defect, a missing habit, or an unresolved emotion. But in your case, the pressure did not come from internal disorder. It came from increased load. You were holding more coherence than usual while moving through environments that were not aligned with it. Your body and mind responded appropriately. The sensation was your internal systems adjusting to maintain balance, like a structure reinforcing itself when weight is added. The reinforcement feels like strain, but it is actually stabilization in progress. Nothing was breaking. Nothing was slipping. Something was strengthening quietly. This is why self-judgment did not help. You did not need to fix yourself. You did not need to push harder or retreat. The discomfort was not asking for action. It was asking for understanding. Once you recognize it as a signal, not a problem, the narrative changes completely. You were not struggling because you were weak. You were stabilizing because you were strong enough to remain aware. This reframing matters because it prepares you for what comes next. When pressure is understood correctly, it loses its ability to confuse you. You stop turning inward with doubt and start observing outward with clarity. You realize that what felt personal was actually contextual. Hold this understanding gently. You are not being asked to analyze every sensation or monitor yourself constantly. You are simply being invited to release the assumption that discomfort equals malfunction. In your case, it often means transition. And that is where the deeper explanation begins. What you were sensing did not originate inside you, even though it registered there. There was an increase in invisible pressure that coincided with your movement through certain spaces, conversations, or decisions. Not dramatic moments, Ordinary ones, the kind that usually pass without friction. This time they did not. The pressure appeared quietly layered and coordinated in timing rather than intensity. It happened recently. Not as a single event, but as a sequence. A narrowing of tolerance around you. Subtle resistance where cooperation used to exist. Delays that did not escalate into failure but refused to resolve quickly. A sense that your presence changed the tone of a room without you saying anything different. This was not imagination. What matters most is how you responded. You did not freeze. You did not spiral. You did not abandon your routines or lose your ability to think clearly. You noticed the pressure and continued functioning. That alone rules out chaos. You remained operational. This is the key detail. When unseen pressure confronts someone who is unstable, it disrupts behavior. It produces reactivity, confusion, or collapse. None of that happened to you. Your sleep may have been lighter. Your patience may have been tested. Your focus may have required more effort. But your internal structure held. You stayed composed, even when conditions became less accommodating. The pressure was not random. It was not spread evenly across your life. It appeared in specific areas, often where clarity or direction mattered. It tested timing. It tested boundaries. It tested whether you would overextend retreat or compromise your internal pacing. You did none of those. You adapted without self-betrayal. You slowed where needed, stayed firm where necessary, and did not escalate when tension surfaced. That is not passive. That is regulated confrontation without conflict. This reveal is not meant to dramatize what occurred. It is meant to contextualize it. You were not singled out because you were vulnerable. You were encountered because you were stable. Pressure reveals structure. It presses to see what gives. In your case, nothing did. You may not have named it as confrontation at the time. It did not look like one. It felt like endurance, like carrying on while something pressed quietly from the side. That is exactly what it was. The reason this matters now is simple. You did not lose yourself under pressure. You did not need to defend your identity or prove your strength. You remained coherent without drawing attention to yourself. That response tells a story far more accurately than any external explanation ever could. And now that the nature of the pressure is visible, it becomes possible to examine how it showed up piece by piece without distortion. The pressure did not arrive as one overwhelming force. It broke itself into distinct points, each subtle enough to seem manageable on its own, yet cumulative in effect. This is how real pressure tests stability, quietly, incrementally, without announcing itself. The first point was doubt. Not dramatic self-doubt, not the kind that makes you question your worth. This was quieter. It showed up as momentary second-guessing, small pauses where your decisions felt heavier than usual. You may have caught yourself revisiting choices you would normally make with ease. The key detail is this: the doubt did not paralyze you. You noticed it, acknowledged it, and still chose. Your clarity did not vanish. It slowed, recalibrated, and continued. That is not weakness. That is internal governance under load. The second point was fear, but not fear of danger. It was anticipatory tension, a sense that something might go wrong without any concrete reason. A background alertness that asked you to stay ready. Many people react to this by tightening, controlling, or projecting anxiety outward. You did not. You allowed the sensation to exist without letting it dictate your behavior. You remained measured. Fear did not take the wheel. It stayed in the passenger seat, observed but not obeyed. The third point was energy drain. You may have felt that tasks required more effort than usual, that your energy depleted faster, even when nothing externally changed. This is where many people collapse or become irritable. You adjusted instead. You paced yourself. You conserved where needed without withdrawing entirely. You did not confuse fatigue with failure. You continued to function within your capacity rather than forcing output to prove something. That restraint preserved your stability. The fourth point was isolation. Not physical loneliness, but a sense of standing slightly apart. Conversations felt thinner. Connections felt less resonant. You may have felt unseen or misunderstood without anyone doing anything overtly wrong. This is a common pressure point that causes people to over-explain themselves or seek validation. You did neither. You allowed the distance without chasing reassurance. You stayed grounded in yourself, even when the relational field felt quieter. The fifth point was delay. Things did not move as quickly as expected. Responses lagged. Outcomes stalled just short of resolution. This kind of delay is particularly destabilizing because it invites frustration and impatience. You felt the tension, but you did not force momentum prematurely. You waited without disengaging. You stayed attentive without pushing. That balance is rare. Across all of these points, one pattern holds. You regulated internally instead of reacting externally. You did not dramatize the experience. You did not turn it into a story about being attacked or tested. You treated each pressure point as information rather than threat. That allowed you to remain stable while others would have fragmented. This is not about endurance for its own sake. It is about coherence. Each pressure point asked the same question in a different language. Would you lose alignment when conditions became less supportive? Each time the answer was no, not because you fought back, but because your internal structure absorbed the strain. That is why the pressure eventually lost leverage. It had nowhere to land. Now there is space to look back at what occurred without distortion. When enough time has passed, patterns become visible. You can evaluate without emotion taking over the analysis. That is where you are now. Not inside the pressure, but just beyond it, able to observe its shape and its outcome. What stands out is not the difficulty itself, but the absence of collapse. Nothing about what happened can be explained by luck. You did not simply avoid consequences by chance. You remained coherent across multiple points of strain over time without external reinforcement. That consistency rules out coincidence. It points to something internal and reliable. You did not fragment under uncertainty. Your thoughts stayed connected. Your behavior stayed proportional. Even when you felt stretched, you did not abandon your values or your pacing. You did not become impulsive. You did not shut down. You remained yourself. That matters more than any external result. If the situation had been random, your response would have been uneven. If it had been overwhelming, you would have lost clarity somewhere along the way. Neither happened. The pressure tested several areas of your life simultaneously, and your internal responses stayed aligned across all of them. That level of coherence does not appear accidentally. You may now realize that you trusted yourself more than you thought. Not in an overt way. You did not affirm it or announce it. You simply acted from a stable center. You made decisions without over-justifying them. You allowed uncertainty to exist without rushing to eliminate it. You let outcomes unfold without trying to control every variable. That quiet trust kept your system intact. This is where false explanations fall apart. It was not optimism. It was not denial. It was not blind persistence. It was regulation. The ability to remain internally ordered when external conditions become less predictable. That ability does not rely on belief. It relies on structure. You were not bracing for impact. You were not waiting for relief. You were present the entire time. That presence prevented escalation. It kept your nervous system from spiraling and your mind from inventing narratives that would have made things worse. Looking back, you can see that the pressure resolved not because it was defeated, but because it completed its assessment. It pressed, measured, and withdrew. You remained functional throughout. That is the confirmation. Nothing about this needs embellishment. You do not need to assign meaning beyond what is evident. The evidence is simple and sufficient. You stayed coherent when coherence was tested. You did not need to be told how. You did not need to learn it in the moment. You already had it. And that realization changes how you understand yourself going forward. Not as someone who survives pressure, but as someone whose internal order does not depend on ideal conditions. When you place your response beside what is typical, the contrast becomes clear without needing exaggeration. Most people do not require extreme pressure to lose their footing. A single unresolved delay, a misread interaction, or a few days of uncertainty is often enough to disrupt their focus. They become reactive. Their thinking narrows. Their emotions begin to steer decisions. This is not a flaw. It is simply common. Your experience unfolded differently. You carried multiple points of strain at once and remained present. You did not outsource your stability to reassurance, distraction, or control. You stayed engaged with your life while the pressure existed, not after it disappeared. That alone places your response outside the norm. This is not about toughness. Many people appear strong until conditions change. Their stability depends on predictability. When the environment shifts, their internal state follows. You demonstrated something else. Your internal order did not mirror external disruption. You felt the pressure, but it did not dictate your behavior. That distinction matters. It means your coherence is not situational. It is structural. You do not require ideal circumstances to remain yourself. You do not need constant affirmation to stay oriented. You do not unravel when clarity is delayed. These qualities are uncommon, but they are not glamorous. They are quiet, often invisible, and rarely celebrated. You may not have noticed how rare this is because it feels natural to you. When something feels baseline, it does not stand out. You may assume others experience pressure the same way you do and simply handle it poorly. That assumption is understandable but inaccurate. Many people collapse inward or outward under far less strain. They lose continuity. They fragment their attention. They abandon their pacing. You did not. This is not superiority. It is capacity. Capacity to hold ambiguity without panic. Capacity to remain functional without certainty. Capacity to stay regulated without external support. These capacities do not make you better than others. They make you rarer in how you move through strain. Rarity does not mean isolation, but it does explain why you sometimes feel out of step. When your internal rhythm remains steady while the environment fluctuates, the contrast becomes noticeable. Others sense it even if they cannot articulate it. That awareness can create subtle distance, not because you are unreachable, but because your presence does not amplify chaos. You did not collapse where many would have. You did not escalate where many do. You stayed present and intact. That is uncommon. And now that it has been observed clearly, it no longer needs to be questioned or minimized. What you demonstrated was not an ability that switched on under pressure. It was not an activated state or a temporary surge of strength. It was baseline. It was already there before anything tested it. This is important to clarify. Some people rise only when circumstances demand it. They mobilize effort. They push past limits. When the pressure ends, so does the strength. That is not what happened with you. You did not shift into a different version of yourself. You stayed consistent. The same internal structure that carries you through ordinary days carried you through strain without needing reinforcement. That tells us something precise. Your stability is not reactive. It is preparatory. You have an internal coherence that was built over time through lived experience reflection and quiet adjustment. You did not learn it in the moment. You refined it long before you realized it was necessary. That is why it held when tested. Structures that are improvised collapse. Structures that are integrated endure. You were not resisting pressure. You were organized enough that the pressure had nothing to disrupt. This is where confusion often enters. People assume strength must feel intense. They expect it to announce itself as confidence or force. But your strength is quieter than that. It shows up as proportion, as timing, as restraint, as the ability to remain internally aligned even when external cues are inconsistent. There was no surge of adrenaline, no sense of conquest, just continuity. That continuity is the identity being clarified here, not as a label to wear, but as a description of how you function. You are someone whose inner order does not require constant adjustment to remain intact. You do not need to harden to survive. You do not need to withdraw to stay safe. You remain present, regulated, and aware by default. This does not mean you never feel strain. It means strain does not reorganize you. You have already done the work that many people try to do after they break. You learned to pace yourself before exhaustion forced it. You learned discernment before chaos demanded it. You learned boundaries before resentment set in. These lessons settled into structure, not performance. That is why nothing dramatic needed to happen for you to hold steady. This identity does not inflate you. It grounds you. It explains why you move the way you do, why you respond as you do, and why certain pressures reveal themselves around you without uprooting you. You are not becoming something new. You are recognizing what has been quietly consistent all along. And once that is clear, you no longer need to question whether you will hold when conditions change. You already know the answer. With that understanding in place, the question becomes how to move forward without overcorrecting. Integration does not require intensity. It requires steadiness. What you have recognized about yourself is not a call to do more, but an invitation to orient more cleanly within what you already do. The goal is balance, not vigilance. First, rest without justification. You do not need to earn recovery by proving exhaustion. Rest is not a retreat for you, it is maintenance. When your system has been holding coherence under pressure, rest allows that structure to reset without losing its shape. Choose rest that actually restores you, not rest that numbs or distracts. Quiet time, reduced input, and unstructured space will feel more effective than escape. Second, practice discernment rather than explanation. You do not need to clarify yourself to everyone. You have already seen that your internal pacing remains accurate even when external signals are unclear. Let that guide you. Discernment means choosing where to invest attention and where to remain neutral. You do not need to convince others of your clarity. You only need to stay aligned with it. Third, reinforce boundaries without rigidity. Boundaries for you are not walls, they are filters. You can remain open without being porous. Pay attention to where your energy drains unnecessarily and adjust gently. This may mean fewer conversation and slower responses, or saying no without elaboration. None of this requires confrontation. It requires honesty with yourself. Fourth, allow patience to replace urgency. You have already proven that you do not collapse under delay. Now you can stop treating resolution as something that must arrive quickly to be valid. Patience is not passive waiting. It is active stability over time. Let outcomes unfold without leaning forward emotionally. You will notice that clarity often arrives when pressure is no longer forcing it. Fifth, narrow your focus intentionally. You do not need to monitor everything. Choose a small number of priorities and give them clean attention. When your focus is coherent, external noise loses influence. This is not about productivity. It is about preserving internal order. Focus protects your rhythm. As you integrate these perspectives, notice what is absent. There is no instruction to harden, withdraw, or stay alert for threats. You are not being asked to prepare for another test. You are being guided back into normalcy with awareness. The point is not to remain on edge. It is to move forward with quiet confidence in your internal structure. What you carry does not require constant management. It works best when you let it. This phase is about settling, not scanning, about living, not interpreting every signal. You have already passed through the pressure. Now, you allow its lesson to integrate naturally into how you rest, choose, and move. The understanding you gained does not demand action. It invites ease. And that ease is what allows the closing clarity to land without resistance. Take a moment to settle into what you now understand. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing is being demanded of you. What has been revealed is already complete. You do not need to hold tension to keep it intact. The clarity you gained does not fade when you relax. It deepens. What matters most is simple. You remained yourself when conditions shifted. You did not disappear, harden, or fragment. You stayed present. That is the core realization. Not that you endured something extraordinary, but that your internal order did not depend on circumstances being favorable. Let that be enough. You do not need to revisit every detail or replay the experience to extract more meaning. The meaning has already integrated. You know now that when pressure arises quietly, you do not lose coherence. You do not need to brace. You adjust naturally. That knowledge stays with you without effort. As you move forward, carry these affirmations lightly. You are steady even when things are unclear. You trust your internal pacing. You remain intact under pressure. These are not declarations to repeat. They are reminders of what you have already lived. If this message resonated, mark the moment in a simple way. In the comments, write 777 or write I remember. Not as a signal to anyone else, but as a quiet acknowledgement to yourself that you recognized something true. If you choose to stay connected, subscribe. Not for urgency, not for fear of missing something, but because this space continues the same grounded clarity you just experienced. The next message will meet you where you are not, where you are told to be. There is no rush to move on from this understanding. Let it accompany you back into ordinary moments, conversations, decisions, silence. You will notice that nothing needs to be forced. You brought light without announcing it. You stayed coherent without defending it. And when the environment adjusted, you did not need to explain yourself. That is not something you are becoming. It is something you already are. Stay steady.